Hello everybody, I'm back with a very special review today because I have the Marvel Legends X-Men 97 Sentinel oversized figure in my collection at long last. And for those who weren't aware, this is Hasbro's new model when it comes to some of these oversized Marvel Legends figures. Rather than utilising a HasLab as they had in the past, indeed with a previous Sentinel, which I actually also have, and I'll put a link in at the end of the video, they now seem to be making figures or committing to making figures, and you have a narrow window in which to sign up and purchase one, and it is exclusive through Hasbro Pulse. Needless to say, this went up for order last year. I was eager to get my hands on the Sentinel because I'm a sucker for Sentinels, I've said it before, but particularly from the animated series, probably my all-time favourite look for the Sentinel, so I had to get one of these. Even though it's quite pricey, and yes, I already have a huge HasLab Marvel Legends Sentinel. So without further ado, let's just get straight into it and take a look at this massive oversized packaging. This is absolutely huge because it is a huge figure. We can see it has the X-Men 97 sort of branding that we see on the standard single carded figures, but obviously this is a huge box, and we have this image here of the Sentinel. It's sort of like a cartoon impression of what the actual figure looks like in its packaging. It's really quite attractive, it's quite bright and colourful, and it's really kind of fun. So I'm actually all for this. It's kind of replicating it as if this was a window display, but of course it isn't. It's cardboard, but it looks great. It's very colourful, and of course you can put this on display and it's going to look pretty striking just simply because it's so massive. If we look at the side panel, there's actually two distinct images on each side. On this one side we have this fantastic image of the Sentinel. I think this is a great use of this giant space. This is really imposing. It's a great image. It looks as if it's taken directly from the source material, i.e. the animated series, and it's really colourful and bright and fun, and obviously this is going to be incredibly eye-catching if you have enough space on your shelf to store it, which I suspect you probably won't. Likewise, if we flip it over and look at the side, we actually have the main cast from X-Men 97, again, very much in the artistic style of that animated series, which is absolutely fantastic, and again, is really fun and a great use of this space. But the absolute best bit, in my opinion, is actually the reverse of the packaging, because we have this fantastic display here, which seems to be photography. I don't think this is a digital rendering, although I might be mistaken. But this is really colourful, like really bam, right in your face. And of course, it's largely text-free, which is amazing. So we have this really dynamic central image here of the Sentinel fighting the other X-Men, the actual figures in the collection, which is great. And then dotted around it, we actually have other images of mass collections of Sentinels doing different things, because the impulse here is to build a Sentinel army. I'm not sure who can afford that, but you know, it is a fun idea. And then at the very bottom, we actually have the full roster of all the other figures that are available in this pretty immense collection now, which is absolutely fantastic. So I love this approach. This feels very much like a retro idea, harking back to the 90s. I used to love it then, I still love it now, and I think this is really, really great stuff. Okay then, so the figure itself is absolutely massive, and clearly he's not going to stand on my turntable to allow me to spin him around. It's just far too big for that. So you'll have to forgive my awful tracking skills here as I try to sum him up in his entirety. But he's obviously clearly overbearing, very impressive, and you know, just huge. But one of the things I wanted to remark upon is that instantly, as soon as I took him out the packaging, he's a little bit lighter than I expected, and indeed the whole figure feels a bit lighter, and part of that will be down to the lack of paint apps, as we'll see as we go through this video. But there's really not a lot in the way of shading or washes on this figure. In fact, there's basically none, and overall the figure has a very plasticky, sort of hollow feel to it. Now on the plus side, the sculpting is actually really good and incredibly screen accurate, I think, especially if you take a look at this head sculpt here. This is really nicely done. This looks like it's come straight off the screen, which is absolutely fantastic. It's got that animated style to it, which is really cool, which is obviously a lot of clean lines, quite simplistic in its approach. And I think to a certain degree you can get away without as many paint apps. Certainly they've not opted for any cell shading, which makes sense, and it looks as though they've really tried to make the most of any details that we have there, particularly around the collar, for example, and of course on the helmet. There's some decent detailing here, but of course there's not an awful lot to play with, because that is the design of the animated series Sentinel. It's very clean and flat, really. But as a consequence here, it makes the figure feel a little bit cheap. And that, combined with the fact that this is quite lightweight, it is a bit underwhelming and slightly disappointing. I wasn't prepared for that. The other thing to recognise here is that this is all brand new tooling. This is absolute brand new fresh sculpt. This is not anything that we've had before. Yes, we've had previous Sentinels, but this is obviously in a different scale, and of course it's a very different look and design. So nothing has really been recycled here. So a lot has gone into this. but I do have this nagging sensation that they've cut a few corners. This is definitely not the same quality as we saw with that HasLab Sentinel, and you might say, well, fair enough, at the end of the day, that was a figure that was probably 3 times the cost of this. So I totally accept that argument, but at the same time, I feel like we could have had a few extra bits and pieces, and I'll summarize those thoughts at the end of the video. But first, let's look at the articulation. There is a ball joint in the top of the head and the neck, which is absolutely fantastic. So he has no problems turning his head all the way around there, which is brilliant. And he can even lean it left and right a really good distance too. Plus, he can also nod it forwards and backwards a pretty decent distance, which is really nice to see. He's got ball joints in the shoulders. Sadly, no butterfly wing joint because I would have really appreciated that. But he does have the complementary bicep swivel and a double pin at the elbow. Now, the one thing you won't hear here, because I was filming this on mute, is this horrible ratcheting, clanking sound that it makes when you snap these joints into position. And that's a little bit underwhelming. Now, of course, he does have a pin swivel at the wrist as well, so the hand will rotate all the way around and hinge forwards and backwards, as you would find on pretty much any figure these days. But he also has this fantastic range of articulation in the hand. So he's got it in the digits there, butterfly wing joint on the thumb. He's also got a hinge for every single digit, meaning you can pretty much replicate anything you can do with your own hand with his hand, which is great stuff. Now, he's also got a ball joint in the lower torso, which is fantastic, so he can move from side to side, and this is neatly hidden with this rubber belt, which is really well done actually. He can also lean left and right a sizable distance. It's not huge, but it's enough. And he can also bend forwards and backwards a little bit, more backwards than forwards. And it's not a huge range by any stretch of imagination, but it's okay. He's got a ball joint in the hips, of course. The legs will kick out to the side, which is great. He's got a swivel at the top of the thigh. The legs will kick forwards a really good distance, and they'll go back too. And pleasingly, we have another double pin at the knee. So that means that lower leg can kick all the way back there, which is really, really nice to see. Now, he also has a standard swivel at the top of the boot cut there as well, which is really cool. And then he's got this kind of ball joint in the foot, which doesn't really allow it to hinge forwards and backwards, sadly, but it will tilt from side to side to give it a little bit of a pivot there, which is pretty nice. So, does he come with any goodies? Well, yes, he does, but they're largely cosmetic. Essentially, we can swap out a lot of elements on our Sentinel to create a battle damage version. So, he has an alternate faceplate, an ultimate helmet, his chest unit, which is a separate piece for some reason, and a battle damage version of that chest unit, which I really like with the wires coming out. I think that's a really nice touch. And then we have some blast effects, the sort of repulsor beam effects, which is very cool. And of course, we have a long and a short blast as well. Now, one of the things I was really impressed with is just how easy it is to swap out these elements. I really like the thought that's gone into the design here. The top cap actually just slides off. We can see the sort of cybernetic brain underneath, which is cool. And then the face itself can just kind of pop out. Now, it can be a little bit tricky at first, but as you can see, it just slides out there. And then you can just simply swap it out for the battle damage version, and you can put on his battle damage cap. And hey, presto, we've got a damaged Sentinel. We can then swap out the chest unit there and pop in the wired version, and we've got the look. This is very, very cool. A couple of very quick changes, and we've got a battle damage Sentinel, which is absolutely fantastic. And I have to say, I think this looks really cool. I love this alternate faceplate. I think that's really nicely done. We actually see the enlarged eye there, the teeth, the wires behind the teeth. This just looks fantastic. Obviously, some different uses of plastic here. There's not paint apps so much, but clearly they're using different plastic to create different tones, which is great. And I think this just looks way more interesting to put on display. And for those who are building armies, then obviously you can have ones who haven't seen some action and the ones who have sadly been on the other end of an optic blast or Wolverine's claws looking like this, which is very cool. And likewise, there's no issues with the repulsor blast. They simply just slot into the blast effects there with the beam coming out, and they just snap into place in those holes in the palms, which look really, really cool. And I was initially a little bit concerned thinking about how weighty they might be. They might pull the arms down, but so far, no issues whatsoever, and they look great. I mean, we've seen this before in our 6-inch collections, but nevertheless, this is a really effective way of doing it, and it looks really, really dynamic and fun when you put it on display. And before I wrap up for today, I want to do a quick scale comparison. Obviously, it's really difficult with a figure of this size, but here it is, standing next to a standard Marvel Legends figure. In this case, it's the X-Men 97 Wolverine in his civilian duds. And as you can see, Wolverine just comes up to the top of his boot there. So that gives you a sense of how massive this figure really is. Now Wolverine obviously is a little bit undersized, so let's put him next to Cable, who tends to be a little bit taller than your standard 6-inch action figure. And you can see even here he's only really just covering above the boot there, which is pretty impressive. So let's take things up a further notch and let's have the recent Gamerverse Juggernaut, who's quite a big boy, and clearly even then he's only just coming up above the knee, which is quite impressive. Now, as you can hopefully see, there's so many options to have fun with this figure. Clearly he has no problems grabbing some of those other heroes in this collection, and just the scale of this fella is just going to make him the centerpiece of your X-Men 97 collection, because you can create so many dynamic and fun and interesting poses and displays with this fella, which is absolutely brilliant. And of course, because we've got those interchangeable elements, if indeed you can army build, you're going to have lots and lots of fun creating really dynamic displays with this guy. So then, what's my final review? Well, I'm going to give the figure just 3 stars, and that probably might be surprising to a lot of you out there, because I've raved about this figure, haven't I? I've said how fantastically tall it is, which I really like. I love the scale of this. I think the articulation is pretty decent for the most part, with a bit of a misstep there when it comes to the feet, I think, in particular. Likewise in the torso, I think there should have been a little bit more when it came to being able to bend forwards or twist a little bit more. But really, they're minor nitpicks. What are my major issues? Well, I think it would have been nice to see a little bit more TLC in terms of the paint apps on this figure. As I said, they're relying very much heavily on the plastics that are used, and you might argue, well, that's the style of X-Men 97, but I think we see this an awful lot with Hasbro. And they're not the only toy company, but they do skimp on the paint apps. And I'm just talking about light wash here and there, just to really draw out the sculpt and the detail, which makes this figure come to life. I also take issue with the price point of this figure, because this wasn't cheap, and it does feel like they've done it on a bit of a budget, really. It would have been really nice for the money for them to just put in some LED lights in the eyes. That would have been really, really cool and would have made a big difference. Now, I'm going to draw a lot of parallels here with the HasLab version, which had that feature, was a lot heavier, a lot stronger. It was taller. It had a lot going for it. And I appreciate that obviously people were throwing down a lot more money for that figure than this one, so it's not fair to necessarily compare the two. However, I think it's inevitable. If you own 2 Sentinels in your collection and you're paying a pretty steep price for this one, why couldn't they go the extra mile? Because I don't know if it would have cost that much more to just give him light up eyes. That would have been really impressive and would have felt like value add for this particular release. And obviously it's very key. We see this in the animated series all the time. There is an emphasis on the glowing eyes, and I feel like that's missing from this figure. I think my biggest gripe with this figure overall, though, is just how lightweight it feels, and it just feels a bit cheap, and that's really underwhelming. Now, as I said, I think it works perfectly well. I think it's really fun. I think they've done a lot of good stuff with it. But one of the things that really bothers me with it is that ratcheting approach that we see in the arms and in the legs, where it really goes click, 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 click. That is a little bit frustrating and also a little bit worrying. It always feels like you're about to snap something. I hate that sound. So that's another little bugbear for me. And I don't mean to really trash this figure, because I think it's great. I just think for the price point, there are little things, little touches they could have made that would have pushed this over the top and just give this a higher star rating. I would have felt more like it was worth spending that money on. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do consider giving the video a like. That kind of thing really does help the channel out, and it allows me to keep making more content. And if you're interested in seeing more content, remember to hit subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos coming soon.